tell me the difference between environmentalism and ecotopia, as you see it.
Okay, environmentalism is a word that has been destroyed by all the wrong people doing all the wrong things. So essentially, say we have a threat called climate change. Climate changes all the time, but this type of climate change is dramatic, and it's going to be very costly, and it's going to mean millions of people have to move around on the planet and probably cause a lot of conflicts. So it is a major problem that needs to be solved. Okay, are environmentalists concerned with solving the climate change threat? No, they're not. They're concerned with plastic in the oceans. They're concerned with anything you could see, sense, but not necessarily anything that scientifically has to do with climate change. They're concerned with you putting your plastic stuff and your paper stuff and your metal stuff in the right little boxes instead of getting a damn machine intelligence that can sort out your garbage for you. So they're concerned with moralism. They're concerned with walking in an Extinction Rebellion parade in Stockholm looking good. Mm-hmm. So they can earn little points for being good people. So they can, demonize people like you for being evil people. That's what they're concerned with.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was told I was evil today on the social network. Someone directly, I don't know if they're being tongue-in-cheek, but they were suggesting I might be evil.
Well, the people that went to war with Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago that we call the social justice warriors are the very same people now that take on the environmentalist agenda. So when they're finished with gender and they're finished with the gender wars and they can't get attention or money or whatever for that war any longer, they probably got to go into the environment right now. And they're all following a little Swedish virgin goddess called Greta. I call her Greta Maguchi because she's very popular with people this year and she probably will be out next year. So we can call her Greta Maguchi. There's nothing wrong with her, okay? But it's wrong with the following, something wrong with the following. So this is where the environmentalists are constantly located. They've been located this round since the 1970s. They're not really concerned with getting a proper education and becoming engineers because engineers can solve problems like climate change. Demonstrators cannot. Kids who go on school strikes will not solve anything. By having more engineers who get involved with solar power, wind power, stuff like that, that will solve problems. For example, the fact that solar power is becoming affordable for millions of people around the world today is because of engineers in China. It has nothing to do with the environmentalists in Europe and North America because they haven't done shit. They've done nothing to solve the problems. So we need more engineers. And engineers are not driven by dystopian lacks of vision, like dystopian things like the world is going down in flames, we need an eschatology, we're all going to die because of climate change. Okay, doesn't help anybody. The problem with something like Greenpeace was that it was also dystopian, environmentalist, dystopian, meaning nobody really got engaged. That meant Greenpeace involved a few hundred people who got obsessed with whales and seals, and which again had nothing to do with climate change. So if you want to take the climate change issue seriously, you've got to understand what climate change is to begin with. The thing to do then, when you take things seriously, you want to build a skyscraper, a dream. Well, then you first build a proper grounding, a proper basement. So you understand what is climate change. What has climate change been for the last 3 million years? When does that happen? What drives it? When does it become a problem? How do you create a planet that has a sustainable population of 10 billion humans on it that survives? That means, for example, even if it's going to take us another 20,000 years before we have an ice age, when the next ice age arrives, we cannot be 10 billion people on this planet. So we need to fix those things. That means you create a vision that we're going to create an ecotopian planet. An ecotopia is a planet that has a sustainable climate, which is sustainable for human life on most of the planet, right? So you can grow food, you can live there, you can have your cities, and you can have the rural landscape, whatever you like. But human beings can live on this planet. Hopefully they can live and also enjoy having quite a few other animals and plants around them so we don't kill all of them. So if you can have this sustainable planet, an ecotopia, that's the vision of a great planet compared to what we have today. That is utopian. And the great thing with utopian visions historically is that they got the engineers on the move. So a lot of guys want to, get a proper education, become engineers. And God, not to save the world, that's an infantile desire, but go out and build and cultivate the entire planet. Yeah, cultivate. The Tower of Babel. I would call this vision the Garden of Babel. because it's like the Garden of Eden, but it's like the Tower of Babel. So let's say we cultivate the entire planet. Cultivare, brilliant Latin word, meaning you cultivate everything, meaning you also control the planet with sensors. So you understand weather, you understand climate, so you know what's going on, and you can be factual instead of guessing what's going on the planet and you know, scare people with it. You can actually find out exactly what's happening and putting the resources where they're most needed. We might have to put iron into the oceans and stuff like that. We might have to encourage millions of farmers out there in the world to somehow bury carbon. We might have to come up with all kinds of technological solutions to avoid the current threat. But the only way to do that is to put an army of engineers out there, not more infantile kids full of themselves. This is different between ecotopianism and environmentalism. I'm not an environmentalist. Everything is environments anyway. So environmentalism doesn't say anything. Ecotopianism says that I believe this planet can be turned into an ecotopia. It probably needs to be done if humans going to be around on this planet. And I think we should have an army of engineers out there trying to figure out how we do that.
All right. What about all the other people who aren't engineers?
Well, we need a lot of engineers, and I don't know what else we need. Let's go
okay. All right.
We need caring people. We need people who care, right? Who take care of older people.
Well, I'm just anticipating maybe a critique of that would be, it sounds kind of just materialistic, right? And, you know, we just have to work on, what about, you know, what about thought? What about philosophy? What about, you know, how do we think about that? How do we think about
climate change is a completely materialistic phenomenon. Climate consists of weather. It consists of air, water, nature, you know, temperature, things like that. There's nothing spiritual about that at all. It's completely materialistic. It's not of interest how people say, oh, we spiritually should worship Mother Earth. Well, we've had enough of New Age people like that. They do nothing to help. They have no help whatsoever. This is a construction problem. Okay. That's all there is to it. So it's rather we should pull the rug on the people who say, well, it's a spiritual change that we need. Well, Ariana Grande sings about that in her latest track. It's a spiritual change we need to save the planet. Well, what has she done? You know, it's not like her singing is going to change anything, is it? It just sounds good.
Who are you speaking of?
Ariana Grande. You know my saying, don't be
I don't
Bono?
know who that is. I don't know who that is.
Okay. Thank you for being so human. Ariana Grande is the world's biggest pop star today.
Oh, really? Okay, that's how I do it.
So when I say don't be Bono, if I say don't be Bono to a 19-year-old, I say don't be Ariana Grande.
Okay.
Now it makes sense, huh? So no, we do not need pop singers. We do not need school strikers. We do not need any more Instagram narcissists out there. We need to tell the guys who are social justice warriors 2 or 3 years ago that no, you're not getting away with it this time either. Your infantile narcissism is doing no good to anybody, meaning we need to respond to that and say that, hey, wait a second, all of us who did encourage people to study engineering and technology, you know, which is the stuff that I do. So if you do that, you've done the right thing for the past 30 years. Instead of just thinking just because you put your garbage in the wrong garbage can, you somehow done something good. No, you haven't. Actually, you fucked it up even worse. Plastic bags in the oceans might not look very good, but it's not a major problem. It's more an aesthetic problem. You know, it's not a threat to the climate. There was even a Stanford University report that came out the other day that said that climate change has already caused a lot of problems in Africa. And they actually literally wrote that in countries like Nigeria and Mauritania, which have rather hot climates most of the year, right? These countries were less productive because of climate change. And I'm just like, no, the climate hasn't changed in Nigeria and Mauritania. Yeah, they're giving birth to a lot of children, fast growing populations, but the climate hasn't changed at all. The climate has changed in Greenland. You know, that's the only place, you know, the Arctic is the only place where we have a documented change of climate due to climate change. Nothing has really changed in Africa. As things are right now, actually, Africa is probably going to be greener and wetter in the future than it's been so far. So these guys who said at Stanford writes these papers should be fired instantly. I mean, yes, climate change is real, but let's get the facts right. If you don't have the facts, you do not have the facts. You cannot sit there and create a mythology about climate change in Mauritania and Africa when there is no climate change registered in that country. That is ridiculous. And if that's happening at Western universities, they're going to have the backlash of climate change deniers that they're getting. You know, that's only deserved. Unfortunately, though, the climate change deniers are also wrong. You know, they're wrong too. Climate change is real. The question is it good or bad? Well, it depends on where you go. I live in Sweden. Sweden is a country that's going to benefit.
Climate change is great from you. Yeah, that's right. Canada too, right? Because Canada can support a large population because it has lots of fresh water.
Yeah.
So it'd be great for Canada.
We should be nice with the Russians because Russia is full of places where actually more people can live because it's going to get greener and warmer and wetter. We're going to have enormous problems in the western half of the United States. Western half of the United States, northern China, and the Middle East. Those are the three places on the planet that are densely populated. We're going to have big problems with climate change over the next 30 to 40 years. Most climate scientists agree on that. Probably Australia's going to have a bad time too, but Australia doesn't really have any people in it, except for some Aboriginals. There's hardly anybody there. But the Middle East, northern China, and the western United States, they need to watch out right now. But where I live in Scandinavia, no, Scandinavia is going to be better off with a warmer, wetter, greener climate. So there you go.
There you go. Okay.
So stay nice with the Russians. We need Siberia. That's ecotopianism for you. Ecotopianism is saying, no, okay, we need to move some Arabs to Russia. All right, let's try to do that then. That's ecotopianism. I don't ever hear environmentalists talk like that. They're just like, no, it's terrible if anybody has to move. No, people have always moved.
Well, there seems to be like what I'm hearing from you now is there's a confusion between the spiritual issue and the actual, actual real facts. People are confusing those two things.
Yeah.
In other words, people have taken this on as a spiritual, almost personal issue, right? Rather than
that's exactly why they're doing the wrong things. Okay, yeah. I'll tell you what. Next to Sweden, where I live, we got Germany. And Germany is now full of car factories that are churning out electric cars.
Yeah.
These electric cars have lithium-ion batteries in them that it takes about 7 years for a car like that to be on the road to be better for the environment than a diesel car. Because that's how much damage you do to the environment by creating a lithium-ion battery and you put it inside a Mercedes. Okay. Not only that, but these electric cars are then rolling around on the streets of Germany, driven by electricity that comes from coal plants. That's even worse than diesel to begin with.
It's again the fashion problem, isn't it? It's the marketing problem.
Germany closed down the nuclear power plants. Okay, nuclear power is absolutely essential if you're an ecotopian, because without nuclear power, we will not have reliable, affordable electricity. And we need tons and tons of electricity for electricity cars and everything else we do that has electricity in it. For example, all the world's laptops and smartphones and data centers and all that shit. Well, all of that stuff needs electricity. We're going electronic now. The world is becoming electronic. Also, the solutions to the problems, the ecotopian solutions to the environment problems or the climate problems, are all down to cheap and reliable electricity. We cannot make cheap and reliable electricity out of solar and wind power. That won't happen. Our biggest hope for that to happen is fusion energy eventually, instead of fission energy coming in nuclear power plants. But the next 2 generations of nuclear power plants are going to use the old fuel and reuse it again. So you recycle the material from the nuclear power plants, meaning it's more affordable.
I've heard nuclear weapons also, right?
Yeah, you do. Yeah, but you're not going to have the problems you used to have with nuclear power. So you cannot realistically solve the current problems in the world without tons of nuclear power. Now, the Chinese and the Indians get this. So the Chinese are building nuclear power plants. The Indians are even building thorium plants in addition to the uranium plants. So India will also have tons of new nuclear power plants. The reason for that is that Chinese and Indian people are ecotopian. They're not environmentalists. They're ecotopian because they realize, oh my God, the Tibet is going to melt and the Himalaya is going to melt. And if the Tibet and Himalaya melt, China and India will be wiped out. So you need Tibet with snow in it to run China. You need Himalaya with snow in it to run India. Otherwise, there's no Ganges, no Brahmaputra, no Yangtze, no Huanghe. Okay, so you're going to have the rivers that make China and India into what they are, which is countries of 1 billion people each. Then you need to keep the snow in the mountains. That motivates these guys to build tons of nuclear power plants. Is anything like that happening in North America or Europe? No, because we got the damn environmentalists in the way. And they say, no nuclear power. Well, then you have coal power instead. And then you burn tons of fossil fuel, which is what America and Germany are doing at the moment. And that's not going to help. So if you take the diesel bus out and you get an electric car in instead, And the electric car has, you know, really damaging lithium-ion batteries in it, and is then going to run electricity coming out of coal power plants for the next 7 years. You really haven't done a thing to change things for the better, have you? No, you made things worse. That is European environmentalism today, and it's the same shit in America.
Okay.
I'm Ecotopian precisely because it's considered a spiritual issue that people propose ideas like nuclear power is evil. So you cannot have that as part of the solution.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's a sentimental spiritual issue. That's not because it's a real spiritual issue.
Well, what are you going to use the spirituality for then? Spirituality is concerned with existential questions. It's concerned with, do you have a purpose and a meaning in your life? Well, if you're a damn solar wind power engineer, you certainly have tons of meaning in your life. If you're a climate school striker, you have no meaning at all. Get a life to begin with. There's something to live for. So as far as I'm concerned, spirituality, yes, but I'm much more interested, like you and I've talked a lot about. I'm interested in Tantra. I'm interested in uniting religion and spirituality again, and on Ecotopianism, which is a term that we need to spread to people so they understand it's an alternative to environmentalism. Meaning that if you're for technological solutions and you want to create an army of engineers out there who solve these problems and really work with solutions that work, maybe a few little things with the atmosphere could really make all the difference we need. We could come up with some genius solutions.
What about
the climate threat issue in the next 10 years? But that needs an ecotopian approach, which is basically technological and based on engineering, and has nothing to do with religion and spirituality itself. Nothing.
What about let's say tantric engineering? Am I stretching things here a bit, or?
No, I think there's just one thing that operates within a universe of discrete units and operates within a universe of energies and fields of intensities and power and materia. It's engineering. Okay, there's no such thing as spiritual engineering. Engineering is a top technological area. No, the engineers do great work 5-6 days a week, then they can go in church on Sundays so we can celebrate them. The rest of us can maybe do that. But the engineering work itself is deeply mathematical, technological, physical. It has nothing to do with spirituality in itself. You can be brilliant.
You don't think people's minds, the state of their beings, affects like how buildings look, and you know, I mean, I look around the French village and I see that these people at one point were deeply spiritual, and you can see it in the stones, right? People have you know, maybe it's engineering, but it's also engineering with this incredible, you know, collective sort of, let's say, faith, right? And now I guess the thing we do now is make rockets.
Listen, mythology and faith is no good in itself. Remember how we talked about the original religion, how actually religion operates? Religion is about an effect. So mythology is about an effect. Religion is essentially telling the people that, well, we got this fairy tale going on here, but if you believe in this fairy tale, we're going to get ahead of stuff. We're going to get out of here. We're going to save ourselves, and we'll need to be on the move the next day. But at the end of the day, the priest gets his points. He gets his likes from God if he tells people the story that puts them on the move the next day. Priests are about peace and movement. They're about creating peace, at least temporary periods of peace, so people don't kill each other more than they have to, and then put people on the move and adopt change. Those are the two priestly commitments versus the people, right? So that means that spirituality in itself is just a waste of time. But if people do spiritual exercises, spend a lot of time being spiritual, so they then go out and do the right thing, then yes, it's...
Yeah, they might become better engineers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Duh.
Okay.
That's exactly why Söderqvist and I are working. We're definitely working with the Ecotopia mission. It's not in the Syntheism book, and it's not in the digital Libido book, so that's definitely going to be part of the next book, but it's inherent in the ideology we're presenting. So I would say Ecotopianism was there from day one. And the study of social ontology, the study of the original nomadic tribe, has been there all along. We're saving those terms for the third book, but in the Syntheism book, you get the full perspective. It's all inherent to the ideology we're working.
Okay, so you also said you're a monist, right? So can you explain that a little bit? And I mean, that would make everything, you know, that's what I'm trying to move towards, this sort of idea of monism, like it's all one sort of thing, engineering and spirituality and the physical and the spiritual, And so if you're just separating these things in different compartments, then maybe you don't have a holistic vision enough, even though, that might be
I don't think you
a
can
new
be
age
any more.
term or whatever.
Wait a second, Andrew. You can't be any more holistic than I am. Okay. When you're born, the first thing you register is that there's a world. Okay. Then you try to crawl up to your mother's tit and suck that tit so you unify with that world, so you have to be your own separate entity. About 12 to 18 months into your life, you start to realize you are an isolated, autonomous entity from your mother's body. That's when the sense of self appears for the first time. That means that Kant and Descartes are dead wrong. No, it's not that you think, therefore you are. It's more, you are, and you are.
Therefore you think.
You are united with the world for a long time before.
I am, therefore I think, rather than I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking. Or saw that there was something there and suddenly thought it existed, right?
Yeah.
So it's the other way around. So the world is primary. So the first thing you need to do when you do philosophy is just accept that there's a world. It's called the universe. Universe means, in Latin, means everything. That's one thing. Universe, everything united. So, and in physics, the word for that is gravity. So everything has an effect on absolutely everything else. And if we then look at the world, say, what I'm working with now in philosophy is like a return actually to the old division between cosmos and chaos. Because there is a primordial chaos of some kind. And then we can build some kind of cosmic order based on that. That's fundamental to cosmology. That's actually how physics works too. That's exactly why I propose this idea and work with physicists right now on an idea of 2 different time dimensions. They hate that I use the word dimensions. We can call it attributes of time. So hypertime can mathematically just be the summary of all time measured by all clocks in the entire universe, and then put an average. You do take that sum and divide it with the number of clocks, you get hypertime. So that's like the average split time of the universe as a whole. You can use that mathematically.
Well, slow down here. You have to explain hypertime a little bit.
Okay, when
a
Einstein,
little bit more in a way that I can understand.
Well, you're familiar with Einstein's concept of time.
Yeah.
It's all based on that time is something that, space-time,
Space-time.
Time.
Well, you're switching it around to time-space rather than space-time.
Yes.
Okay.
Einstein assumes that there are 3 space dimensions and adds a 4th dimension that he calls time, meaning that allows for mathematics to expand, and meaning that time is then relative to the space. So they're intertwined with each other. And that's correct. Einstein and time undoubtedly works. So that means depending on where you put a clock, if it's like movement or whether it stands still, it will measure time differently. It will follow the arrow of time. But if I take a little trip out on the planet, out in outer space and then return here to this planet, I will have aged differently from you if you stayed here at the same time. So that's correct. But that's Einsteinian time, or we call it local time in physics. Okay. But if you decide that time is the origin of everything, and then space comes out of time, it's just like taking Einstein's mathematics and moving it around to the other way. They discovered, why would you just have 1 time dimension? You could just have 2 time dimensions instead, or 2 different versions of time. So you would have hypertime and time. You work the same way with space, because if you, for example, work with parallel universe theory, they assume there could be different universes.
Yeah.
They could operate independently of each other. You have to assume that there's some kind of a hyperspace within which these universes operate independently of each other.
I see. Okay.
That hyperspace can be spooky and weird and all kinds of things, but it's called hyperspace. You can do the same thing with time.
So if you have local time, there has to be hypertime as well. Am I getting it?
Well, the interesting thing is once you start thinking what hypertime could be, Henri Bergson calls it just duration. He just assume there's a pure duration. It just moves at the same pace throughout history, and then local time can move faster and slower or whatever along this global time. You get 2 time dimensions.
So you have a fluctuating time and you have a regular time, like a clock time. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Okay, we can't call it absolute time because Newton made that word dirty, the way environmentalists have made the word environmentalism dirty today. So we'll skip it. But let's go back to that. But the thing is that once you start looking at what that kind of hypertime could be, for example, you could have time before the Big Bang. If you're going to do mathematical models on a possible big crunch that predates the Big Bang, you can suddenly do that because you can't do that with Einsteinian time. Einsteinian time is a stop at the Big Bang, it starts there. Okay. Now you can have another time that actually is older than the Big Bang itself. So if you're going to just work with theories like that, you could call it virtual time too, but if you work with theories like that, you can assume there's a hypertime. Now, the interesting thing, once you just start discussing hypertime versus global time versus local time, you also discover that, wait a second, we also have this problem in physics that either the world is continuous or analog, or the world is fundamentally discrete. Okay, it's an old issue in philosophy.
Okay, right, got it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we know that if you go all the way down to the Planck length, which is the smallest unit we know of where anything makes sense, below the Planck length, if it's even smaller than that, it's what we call pure chaos. So at the Planck length, something weird happens. Suddenly, the spins become on or off. So the zeros and ones that we're familiar with from mathematics, that we would call information, 0, 1, right? They start already at the Planck length. And that seems to be the case with just about everything we have in our current expanding universe, where nothing is ever destroyed, meaning information is never destroyed, not even in black holes, meaning the reason why the universe is expanding is because the information of the universe is expanding.
All right.
It's quite trippy, right? Yeah, it gets quite
tricky.
trippy.
It gets quite tricky. Well, I've heard this information theory a little bit. Like
exactly. It is tricky to the physicists too. This is all called quantum information theory.
Yeah.
So it's a whole new area of physics. But if you heard about holograms and things like that, that's all part of this whole new domain. And guys like Susskind and Smolin and Gesek and all the most brilliant physicists out there working on stuff at the moment, they're really far ahead of the rest of us. They're doing now quantum information theory. And they try to see if that can work with, say, loop quantum gravity theory, or maybe with string theory eventually, so that all the different traces physicists have been working on for the past 40 years maybe could be different versions of the same thing, which is quite likely if you start digging really deep into it. But the great thing with hypertime is that hypertime would then be some kind of a void, some kind of chaos, meaning you could also solve the problem of whether the world is continuous or whether the world is discrete by saying it's probably both.
Right.
The continuous realm.
So it's a wave and a particle, again, the obvious cliche.
Well, even more than that. Even wave particle, I would say in physics, we've proven by now that the field is primary to the particle, because the particle only occurs when there's an observer involved. Otherwise, that it's a field. We call that field of intensities. So the fields of intensities are primary to the particles. So that's not an even situation. No, but this is more about discretion, because fields can also be discrete. It's deeper than that. It's deeper than the particle and the field, although that taught us how to think in two realms at the same time, and which is great. But I'm beginning to believe that we could probably get at hypertime as realizing that's like a continuous void of some kind on which you then build the current discrete universe. We'll see where we arrive with the mathematics.
Well, what does that look like?
The philosophers agree. As a philosopher, I'm perfectly allowed, and I'm even encouraged to further pursue this idea and see where we can arrive.
Okay, so that's kind of like reminds me of the Heart Sutra. It says, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." And then it says again, "Form is form, and emptiness is emptiness."
It doesn't really deal with emptiness. No.
When you said void, it sounded like what? Void. You said that a continuous void or something like that.
Well, I used the void. Maybe that's a bad term, like environmentalism. We have to skip it as we work further with this. I say it's a new way of looking at cosmos and chaos, but a whole new way of doing it. Cosmos and chaos. So the chaos is the continuous, and the cosmos in this case is the discrete, meaning even the words cosmos and chaos are kind of limited. Please note, however, that this is just one universe. So that means the hypertime I'm working on is just the foundation. It has no infinity. It has no void in the sense of anything empty. No, it has smallest possible units and most enormous possible units, but it can contain those two things. But the hypertime, if you can work on it and get it right, is actually something on which we can then build the current Einsteinian space-time, which apparently seems to be valid for our universe. But that means that current Einsteinian space-time is probably not the end of the game. And the great
it's nested within hypertime. Is that what you're saying?
It's all, we could say hypertime is that on which the rest is built.
Okay.
The great thing with these theories is that if we can solve hypertime in relation to quantum information theory, we can solve problems like entanglement, meaning we can finally unify classical physics and quantum physics. That would be the ultimate, holy grail. We could do that. Meaning that means you also solve the problem of the division of physics between general relativity and quantum organics and psychology.
Right. Okay.
This is obviously one universe. It's just that we haven't understood how these two things are connected with each other because you haven't thought bravely enough yet, or wildly enough yet. And there's both more complexity and more simplicity to better physics. So you have to be both capable of simplifying things and also making them more complex at the same time. That's why physics is so fiendishly difficult to do.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But mathematics alone cannot solve that problem. And the problem with mathematics is also that you can end up in loops like string theory did. And certainly anybody who does infinities and transfinities mathematics end up in loops that have nothing to do with reality because there is no infinity in reality.
Well, that's my next question really is how do you translate all this to reality?
Oh, you do. I mean, I prefer not to work with anything in mathematics that is not connected to reality because I'm interested in mathematics being a proper representation of the represented, which is the universe itself. I'm not interested.
The universe is represented. I see. Okay.
Yeah, that was the point with mathematics until we introduced the zero and we introduced the infinity sign. Now, the zero sign was popular in mathematics because it made counting so easy for capitalists. We could not have built capitalism unless we first accepted the zero in mathematics. That changed everything because we suddenly had 10 and 100. But please note that the zero in itself does not exist in nature.
There's no such thing as nothing.
No, exactly. The whole question of why is there something rather than nothing is a wrongly asked question. Life
no such thing as nothing. There's only infinite plenitude.
There cannot be nothing. We just have to get used to the idea that something is something, period. There is no option called nothingness.
Yeah.
We think nothingness because we did not exist before a certain date. And we think nothingness because we'll die one day. And again, we're being too anthropocentric because we're obsessed with ourselves and being a bit narcissistic and anthropocentric. Then we think that there must be something called nothingness. No, there is history before us, there's history after us. But well,
the Buddhist position would be like there's no substance, there's no thing. Like there's no actual thing. There's, as you say, there's just one. There's no thing. There's no substance underneath the thing. Which is what they mean by emptiness. They don't mean a sort of blank void. They mean kind of union of plenitude and zero, right?
That's just bullshit because they're missing out on the next important thing in metaphysics. And that once you accept that there's one world, that's the only thing that's one. Like Nietzsche says, there's nothing less than two in nature. Meaning, the world is full of attributes of difference. So when you start registering a thing, when you sort of register a phenomenon, even an object in a Kantian sense, that means there's difference in fields of intensities. There's more intensity in one place than there is in another. For example, I'm sitting here at a table, okay? The table itself is more dense than the air around the table. That's a difference in intensity between...
But the table is supposed to be more full of space, right? Than the air, which is supposed to be more solid.
I'm comparing air and table. I don't care if there's full of space. Okay, that's because there's no substance to it because it's forces. So if you look at an electron, for example, the power of the electron is amazing because the electron itself, if there's anything there to begin with, it's incredibly small, but the power field surrounding the electron is amazing. So these fields of forces, essentially what creates a substance that we perceive as being substance and solid. Now we know that from physics, and that's not even disputable, but that's how it works. So that's a trick of the mind. But there's certainly something there, and I'm very much a philosophical realist. There's a real world out there. And if you don't believe in it, just get blindfolded and walk around and hit the wall a few times. You're certainly gonna sense that there's
knock yourself in the head with a hammer.
Independent of your exactly. That's a world independent of your fantasies that comes back and haunts you constantly. So Let's just understand that that's the case.
So should we move on to religion, perhaps, then, since we've we've brushed that with monism and all that, and we also you also wanted to talk about Zoroastrian, and I've kind of put a bit of Buddhism in there. So,
okay, where does dualism come from? Dualism is basically a Western Abrahamic phenomenon. Suddenly, Jews and eventually the Christians and the Muslims decided that there was spirit and body, and they'd be separate from each other.
mm-hmm.
That is the West. I have no tolerance for dualism. The origin of dualism is called Gnosticism. Gnosticism comes out of the Middle East, and it's heretical movement against Zoroastrianism. It starts in Babylon, and certainly caught on with Egyptians.
Yeah.
And the reason why it caught on with Egyptians was because Egypt had boy pharaohs. It had little boys who got the title of pharaohs, meaning that they were gods and kings at the same time, and they were 10 years old. Now, if you're 10 years old, somebody tells you you're the tyrant and you can decide anything you like, you become a dictator, and you're not even a sexual creature yet. You're probably going to dream about yourself being a god, right? So you're going to build pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In Babylon, at least, they built ziggurats. A ziggurat is a building towards the sky where two priests walk up from two sides of the ziggurat to declare a mythology that puts people together, right? The narrative we try and create today, a global grand narrative so that people don't have to kill each other. Okay, that's what we do today. It's priestly work. Now, the paradigm of that in Egypt was that you skipped the stairs and just built a pyramid towards the sky. A pyramid is the most useless thing you could ever come up with. It is absolutely no use whatsoever. It's just an empty symbol of the vanity of a 10-year-old boy pharaoh. That's essentially what a pyramid is. But the pyramid was assumed to shoot you into the afterlife. So you could kill like hundreds of soldiers and dozens of concubines and anything you wanted to take with you to that sort of harem you were going to, that paradise you were going to in your afterlife. So it becomes an obsession with the next life. That's
So this is what Nietzsche called sort of life-denying philosophy.
Yes, because then the spirit goes to the next life, but the body can't, because the body obviously deteriorates. You can turn your body into a mummy and hope nobody sees what you just did. But the guys who made the mummies realized that we're actually dealing with corpses here. It's all make believe, but in reality, this corpse it's just makeup. We're just filling it full of perfumes and stuff, so it won't rot so quickly. But in reality, it's a corpse, right? So you're dead. You're dead. Okay. Dualism is the idea that spirit and body are separate from one another. And of course, that fantasy is only created by somebody who's too ugly to fuck.
Okay,
right?
Here we go.
Say you don't have a sex life. Okay, what do ugly people do when they're envious of people who are beautiful and get to fuck a lot? They create the idea that, but it's much more noble not to fuck. It's much more noble to be spirit away from an evil body. So the body is disgraceful and sinful, and anything to do with the body is bad, whereas a spirit, high in itself, can just lift off and be divine, right?
Can I stop you there for a sec? What do you do with the ugly people then? I mean, it sounds like a brutal statement a little bit, what you're saying.
No, Nietzsche said they took over the world. They're called Gnostics.
The ugly people take over the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of autistic people out there ugly these days, and they're Gnostic too. So all they do is that they said, well, the spirit is higher than the body. So it's like you cut off your throat here, and anything beneath the throat is bad, and whatever is above your throat, well, your head, your mind is beautiful, your spirit is beautiful. And there's usually spirit above the mind too. So you then have spirit and body separate from one another. The problem is there's a logical problem to this. Now, if there's a spirit in the body, they obviously collaborate with each other, even if one is evil and one is good. Otherwise, you wouldn't be alive. Now, how do they communicate with each other if they're two different substances? Well, they never solved that problem. They just whisked it away. Said that, well, we won't even deal with that. It's like sacred knowledge. We don't understand that. No, you don't. Okay.
Well, I can see that the fact that inside yourself you have different, qualities. You have, your reptilian brain, which is sort of doing one thing, and then you might have a more subtle, brain that's doing something else. And
No. That's just attributes of the same body. You know perfectly well your brain is not operating without blood. The blood is not there unless you eat. Unless the liver and the kidney function, you're not going to have iron in your blood, etc. So this is one system that works. That's just attributes of the system. No, I am a radical monist, meaning that I believe I am a body and a brain and a mind, and all of these things are intertwined. This brain cannot exist without the body and the other way around. So otherwise I die. So this is one system. There's no different substance in it. There are no two substances here. It's just one substance. And I'm an aspect of that substance, which is the universe. And I'm an aspect of that substance or an attribute, and that's me. And so are you, because our bodies are like insulated.
What about illusion? What about ego? What about, much of our experience is psychosomatic, right? What am I trying to say here? We don't see things as they are.
No, of course not. Your own ego, your own sense of self is a byproduct of the brain's operations.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist outside of that. But the point here is, from the Gnostics onward, we have the idea that spirit is higher than body and they're separated. And in about the 2nd century, this becomes a religion called Manichaeism. And Manichaeism was briefly the biggest religion on the planet. It pushed Zoroastrianism east and it pushed Christianity west. Manichaeism was a hugely successful religion. And the leading Manichaean was a scholar called Augustine.
St. Augustine.
He lived in northern Egypt and he converted from Manichaeism to Christianity, and he took away in this complete separation of spirit and body into Christianity and forced it into Christianity. So Christianity is an Augustinian religion, and that's why essentially it's the same thing as Manichaeism. Since then, Christianity has dealt with the fact spirit and body are separate, and spirit is high and body is low. Okay, so that then becomes the Enlightenment in Europe in the 7th century with Descartes. I think, therefore I am, is that his soul is separate from the body. Again, it's the same dualism. And this goes all the way through to Immanuel Kant, who perfects the Enlightenment vision of dualism. Immanuel Kant is a dualist. Now, finally, in the early 19th century, we arrive at Hegel. And Hegel has read Spinoza, who by then is the only radically monist philosopher we had in the West. I would say Leibniz partly too, but he doesn't get it. Spinoza is the radical monist. He even says that everything is one substance.
Everything is one
substance. The name of that
substance.
substance is God, and everything else is just difference and attributes of that substance. Now, I'm a Spinozist. So was Hegel, except that Hegel turned metaphysics around from Spinoza and said, thank you for the inspiration, Baruch, and I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm going to start with difference and look at the world from difference and see how we look at difference dialectically to sort out things. So Hegel creates a wonderful system for thinking, which is incredibly creative. Ever since then, if you've been intelligent, after Hegel and Spinoza, you're basically dealing with these two guys and how you're going to figure out whether you're going to see difference as primary or whether you're going to see substance as primary. It doesn't really matter. It's a bit like you can either work from physics as an emergence and understand physics, or you can work for, say, biology and understand biology's emergence with its own laws, its own habits, and then work and understand biology and biological evolution. So you can start it where you like. Now, to me, I'm neutral between Hegel and Spinoza. I love Spinoza to bits. I would say that my worldview is fundamentally Spinozist, and I'm using Hegel to think, meaning as a thinker, I'm incredibly Hegelian. So
that's dialectical.
So I'm not dualist at all. I'm monist. And dialectics is essentially the road towards understanding this monist universe better. It's a logical procedure for you're going to get at the truth of things. So we're living in the shadows of Hegel and Spinoza, and that is what Western thinking is. Now, thing is, though, that we've just gotten used to monism, meaning monism is either Hegel's dialectics or it's Spinoza's monist pantheist worldview. But monism was always the thing in the East. Taoism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Hinduism, well, I'd say we talk about Hinduism later, but they're all monist religions. Okay, I'm not really sure Hinduism is monist, to be honest about it. They go all kinds of weird ideas like reincarnation that don't really fit into monism. But with Buddhism and with Taoism, with Zoroastrianism, you are really dealing with radically monist worldviews, meaning the universe is one, there's a huge amount of attributes of this universe, and we ourselves are expressions of that universe. So that is always a better way of looking at the world because it is correct. You don't run into the problem with two different substances finding it out, and then you don't have any clue how they communicate with each other because that requires a third substance, and then you lost it. Rather, you look at the universe as just one substance, period. And to understand how this substance functions, is
Mm-hmm.
physics, right? And on that substance, you can double attributes, for example, the world of biology, which is an emergent property on that substance. So biology becomes out of physics and suddenly just occurs. And because it suddenly just occurred, it operates according to its own rules. So do you and so do I. Now with monism, you don't run into problems in science. Got that over done with. You can step right into Eastern thinking and you can get it. You can immerse yourself in it. And you can also get into 19th century Western philosophy. But it took until the 19th century and the recognition of Spinoza by both Hegel and Nietzsche until we finally got around to understanding the world from a monist worldview in the West. That might be called a materialist worldview. I don't care whether it's material or not. It's just one damn substance. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty material.
Okay, so you've been pretty anti-Christian and all this, but one thing I heard you said at one point was that you thought that the Catholic tradition introduced something called mercy, and this was important.
Well,
The idea of mercy, right?
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with dualism. Maybe it required dualism to get started. You know, like life originally started under very special circumstances. We don't need those special circumstances any longer because we now have life. Okay? So maybe dualism was a reason why you could develop concepts like grace and mercy, because to be a beautiful spirit, you had to, you know, you did sin with your body, and then you went somewhere and somebody was graceful to you and said, we forgive you for your sins because you did in your body, because you had a body, and we all know bodies are like, so we can forgive you for that. It's possible that that's the case. Because grace and mercy will probably be required when the digital tsunami hits us in the next 10 to 15 years, because everything will now be memorized. And if you don't have grace and mercy, we cannot stand each other. So, point taken. But it doesn't mean that we can accept dualism, because dualism is wrong. And what the Zoroastrians did, why I converted to Zoroastrianism, was that they considered all the dualists, the Manichaeans, the Gnostics, the Masticates. There were a lot of dualist traditions coming out of Persia and Babylon, especially in the early part of our, you know, after Christ, about that period, those first 400 years. And they were all considered heretics by the Zoroastrian priests, by the monks. And I find that interesting. Zoroastrianism is an aggressively monist religion. There's only one universe, period. Spinoza essentially is a Zoroastrian. So is Buddhism.
So what do you do as a Zoroastrian? I mean, what do you practice? What is your praxis? Like, you know, in Buddhism, there's all these series of things you do, right? And I guess in most religions, there's a bunch of things that you do. Right? It's not just
I get up in the morning and have a cup of coffee and do my morning meditation called the Ashram Vuhu. So that's Zoroastrian meditation.
Okay.
I mean, I focus on what I'm going to do that day, and I can focus on having a constructive mindset and setting out clear goals that I want to achieve that day. Very phallic, right? And then I do those things, and I prioritize those things, and I don't waver around like thinking, what else am I going to do? I stay focused with doing what I'm supposed to do. And that is all sort of dripping down from my overall purpose with my life. What I find important, what is my role with community? It's all very ethical. So Zoroastrianism does not have any morality. It's a purely ethical religion, meaning it's only interested in cause and effect. So you do this little thing in the morning. This little thing means that this little wave you do, that's like the equivalent of the crucifixion sign, the Catholic stuff. The way it's like, whatever you think is probably going to be what you say, and what you say is going to produce the act, commit. And the act you commit would then be the starting point for your next thought. So this is like a circle. Beware of this circle, meaning that when you suddenly have to make a decision, you need to be prepared for that decision. If you're not prepared, you don't know what you're doing. If you're prepared for having to make a decision, for example, avoiding crashing a car when that happens, you train yourself for it. It's like you're almost pre-programmed to do the right thing when that happens. That is an incredibly Zoroastrian approach. So when you meditate, and when you study, and when you solve your own existential issues with yourself and find your archetypal role in the community, then you get that as a Zoroastrian, you get it right, you do it.
Okay.
It is the most successful religion we've ever had when it comes to education, when it comes to income, when it comes to social networking effects. The only guys in America who beat the Jews when it comes to education, wealth, and income are the Zoroastrian immigrants from India and Iran.
Wow. But there's only like 150,000 of them. There's only 150,000 of them in the world, right?
No, there are about 150,000 Parsis in India.
Uh-huh.
No, there are about 3 million committed Zoroastrians in the world today, and there'd be about 15, 20 million probably if it wasn't illegal in a lot of Muslim countries to convert to Zoroastrianism. There's a lot of conversions going on in Iraq at the moment because there's a lot of people in Iraq, especially Kurds, who don't want to be Sunni Muslims any longer because they associate that with Islamic State. So Zoroastrianism also works tightly with other religions like the Yazidis in Iraq, for example, because we're pretty tolerant. We're not aggressive about our dogmas and things like that. No, Zoroastrianism is actually fundamentally a very liberal religion. And it's also very ethical. So it's like the opposite of other religions, where other religions have
where you convert people or whatever.
Yeah, the fundamentals are about conversions and aggression and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's the problem with both Christianity and Islam. Zoroastrianism has the opposite way. It's like the most liberal and tolerant form of religion is the original Orthodox version. So if you're an Orthodox Zoroastrian like me, you're a very liberal, tolerant person. And that's because the original scripture of Zoroastrianism, the Gathas, which is Zoroaster's own text, is an incredibly liberal and liberating text. Zoroaster is essentially celebrating civilization. And what he's saying is that the people who do settle down rather than being nomadic and invest in their own future and their own children are worthy of the fruits of their labor, because they'll be way more successful than people who just wander around. So Tantra, which later arrives, of course, in India and China, originates in Zoroastrianism. The Tantric approach to the world, the idea that if you invest in the future and don't run off and do whatever silly things you might do today, but rather invest in the future, be clever about things, originally that's a Zoroastrian idea. And that idea is the origin, for example, in Chan in China and Zen in Japan, which are originally Zoroastrian traditions. They came with Sogdian and Bakhtian traders to China. And in China, they were interpreted as Chan and Zen. And only like in the 19th century did we add the word Buddhism to it. So you can add Buddhism or Zoroastrianism or Taoism to just about any school coming from the East, and you discover all three religions embrace all three schools. For example, Tantra is both Zoroastrian and Buddhist and Taoist. So
and Hindu.
That's the case.
I mean, there's Tantric Hindu also. I mean, there's the balls.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
You wanted to say something about Hinduism, I think.
There is a problem with Hinduism. Yeah, I call Zoroastrianism, Taoism, Buddhism. I call them the Silk Route triad, because they were all religions along the Silk Route.
Yeah.
Hinduism didn't spread the same way, and that's because it isn't really compatible. It's not one package, not one teaching. You could actually take way along the trade routes, because Hinduism is basically just the acceptance in Indian culture of a rich variety of beliefs. That's where you can worship an elephant god one day, and then you worship the Brahman the next day, and then you worship Shiva and Kali the next day. Hinduism is incredibly interesting to study the origin of mythology. It is. But a lot of Hindu mystics are dealing with the idea that maybe time is an illusion, and that all of these things that are happening around us are just like ephemeral and things like that. There's a lot of Hindu mystics that deal with that. And they come from a Dravidian tradition in southern India originally, and that's also why they have this idea of reincarnation. Okay, reincarnation requires the separation of spirit and body. So you run into the problem of dualism again. And I would say most of Hinduism has a problem with dualism they hardly ever deal with. They call it non-dual. That should have kind of make it suspect, shouldn't it? Why is it non-dual if it isn't just monist? Because it isn't dual.
Well, I've heard one explanation I can tell you. There's not one and not two. So because if you say two, you're wrong. But if you say one, you're denying diversity or so.
Okay.
So that's it's called neti, not one, not two. That's
now. But then it's not number or non-cardinal, whatever. But it isn't. And this should, the alarm bells should be going when somebody says, "I'm not that." Well, if you say you're not something, you haven't really defined what you are. So I would say that in itself sort of rings the alarm bells to me. I'm a radical monist. And when you look at non-dual teachings coming out of India, they often make that last little turn dialectically where they say, well, in reality, the oneness itself is also an illusion. So there's like time is illusion. So it's like, this is one sort of massive being, Brahman. And then you say, well, there is change, difference, obviously. You know, the universe is expanding, right? So we live and we die, and evolution exists. So
then there's the Kali Yuga and all the cycles of time that they describe in Hinduism as well.
Well, that's change. So if change is then ephemeral, if change is an illusion, then who set up this whole theater? And then you arrive with the idea that the world is originally some kind of a theater being set up as a kind of God playing around with us. That's always where you arrive with dualism. And that's why I'm not a Hindu. So I don't buy into the dualism. But there are monist traditions within Hinduism that are compatible with Zoroastrianism and Buddhism. Buddhism itself was one of them.
Yeah.
And the only reason Zoroastrianism wasn't one of them, although it's also been practiced in India, is because Zoroastrianism came from Central Asia. It was developed in a different part. It was developed north of the Hindu Kush. And it also came out of the same Indo-Iranian original folk religion. And Zoroaster considered himself a reformer. He was a mystic who basically said that, no. This is one substance. But this substance has different attributes. And the first attribute it has is different from the substance itself. So it deserves its own name. Is mind. Okay. But
that reminds me of the Buddhist school, the mind-only school. You know, the Madhyamaka, it's just mind-only.
Okay. Zoroastrians have both, meaning that there's both mind and there's body, meaning that they're two aspects of the same thing. Remember, this is Monist. The name for this is Ora Master. Ora means being, that which has being, that which has supreme being. That is the ultimate thing. Whatever exists out there is Ora. But Master is the capacity for mind to occur, meaning there's biology. And out of biology comes a fundamental consciousness or sentience called mind. And in mind, we can also be conscious. Now, the fact that we become conscious of being a part of this world is pretty amazing. So that's called Master. And it's important here to stress that the Zoroastrians consider themselves to be Master Yasni. They worship the mind. They're not Ahura Yasni. They don't worship being. That's where they also think they differ from the Hindus.
They don't worship being, they worship the mind. Why is that?
Yeah. No, it's a choice. And when you dig into
but hold on, that's kind of seems like a dualism to me. Mind and being aren't they?
No, that's a duality. Two different attributes of the same thing.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, when you go deeper into that, do you remember that I told you the last time we talked that religion and sexuality should be unified?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that as well.
Okay. Religion and sexuality were never separated in the East. Never were. That's why you have Tantra. And that's a part of Tantra is teaching how to contain your sexuality. It's a spiritual practice. So since they are united, you have to understand Zoroastrianism as a religion where religion and sexuality are united.
Yeah, but hold on. But why are there forest monks? Why are there people going, to practice celibacy and that kind of thing? Because but that is working with sexuality.
No, it is Zoroastrianism. That's what you have in Catholicism.
Well, that's what you have in, there's a monastic tradition in Buddhism as well.
In Zoroastrianism, the monastic tradition is banned because
there's no like also
all
in
believers in Zoroastrianism are monks and nuns. There's no separation. There are no sacred holy people like uglies who are, envious, who go off and be the superior spirits to the rest of us. Like, today's social justice warriors are often ugly, they're miserable lives, but they feel superior to you and me because they're climate strikers, something like that. Okay, there you go. Same shit again. So this was something the Zoroastrians realized would happen. That's why they hated the Gnostics. That's why they hated the Manichaeans. Put them outside of the religion and said, no, we're radically monist. I mean that each believer should be your own monk, and nun, and we're all part of the worship of Master, meaning we worship Master Yasni, meaning we are philosophers. Master Yasni means the love of wisdom.
The love of wisdom.
The origin of the word philosophy.
Yeah, philosophy, the love of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom.
Philosophia in Greece arrives in Greece 1,200 years later, and it's a literal translation of the Persian term Master Yasni. So the original philosophy was in Persia, not in Greece. And the original philosopher is Zoroaster.
That might surprise a lot of people. Yeah.
They haven't studied history properly, and they haven't understood that anything we've done in the West is usually a bad imitation of whatever they did in the East, long before the West. But back to religion and sexuality. Now, if you unite religion and sexuality, you don't need dualism, because the division that creates the space for dualism to occur is that religion and sexuality are separated, And religion then becomes something finer and nice, and sexuality becomes something dirty. Then religion becomes associated with spirit. Sexuality becomes associated with body. And spirit and body, they become two separate substances where spirit resides over body. And suddenly the whole universe must be spirit and it must be body, meaning that
body is dirty and body is
material world, which is nasty and ugly, and there's a spiritual world of spirits and ghosts or whatever that's higher. That is the Gnostic universe, which is a lie. If you realize that religion and spirituality should be united, and should have been all along, and you join a religion where that's actually the case, you get a more interesting choice. That is between the phallus and the matrix. The phallic, you know, we talked about the phallic storytelling.
Phallic and matrix. Okay.
Phallic storytelling is like, it's the patriarchy story. We're going to get higher and we're going to get, you know, create a better civilization. We're also going to sell ourselves. There's a direction to where we're going tomorrow morning. There's the matriarchal storytelling. That's the one that says that everybody's going to follow us. And that means the oldest woman who walks at the very back, you better be ahead of her. She's a bitch, because if you're behind her, you're in chaos. That's exactly what chaos, like Jordan Peterson says, is always mother chaos. It's always a goddess, right? In Hinduism, interesting, it's Shiva and Kali. Hinduism is also a religion that's not afraid of
Shiva and Kali.
Every Shiva temple in India is full of dicks. And every Kali temple is full of chaos, which is the idea of the womb. Like, it's just like, if you're out of the womb now, don't ever think you're going to come back in, because that's just chaos. You need to stay there and grow up. But you can literally choose if you want to be Zoroastrian or Buddhist. Because you're either going to worship the matrix, which is what Buddhism does, which means you just want to meditate and stop having desires and stop having drives and just be in a completely pure, empty consciousness with no affiliation whatsoever to anything. You're detached from the world. Okay,
yeah, I would question that.
Learning how to die.
In terms of as being the ultimate of Buddhism, but
no, that is Buddhism according to the Buddha. Zoroastrianism according to
but Tantric Buddhism is a little bit different than Tantric Buddhism is a little bit different.
No, wait a second. I know, because your Dzogchen, wanting to realize I'm going to arrive at that point, is that Dzogchen is the unification. If you choose Zoroastrianism, you choose it because it's phallic. It's all about civilization. When I'm an Ecotopian today, I'm Zoroastrian, deeply Zoroastrian. Now, I'm also Hegelian, which means that when I picked and chose religion, I studied Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism. And I discovered that Taoism tried to unify the two, and I wasn't really certain that that would be that smart. That's when China has enormous problems.
I moved from Zen to Tantric Buddhism for perhaps that same reason.
But Tantric Buddhism,
Tantric Buddhism and Dzogchen and Vajrayana extremely emphasizing on skillful means and
listen, Andrew, you're in the right place. Where is Tibet located?
Got the peak.
We talk about
the phallic peak of the world.
Yeah. No.
Well, the Himalayas.
Okay,
no.
that's you're really a phallus worshiper, aren't you? No, I was asking where is it located, not where it was high or low.
Okay.
You got three major civilizations in Asia. Civilizations that were 5,000 years old. Okay, which are these three civilizations? What are their names? China, Persia, and India. Now, the benefit of living in Tibet or in the Hindu Kush is that you're in the borderline between these three civilizations. So you would expect people who live in monasteries and in the mountains of Tibet and Himalaya to quite, rather wildly experiment to throw these things around. Now, that is exactly what Tantric Buddhism does. So it involves both the phallic and the matrical. That's exactly what Zoroastrianism.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It involves both.
Have never had conflicts with each other. There's not a single registered conflict between Zoroastrians and Buddhists. Because there's no need for it. It's a monist worldview. So I don't have a problem with any monist on me, whether they like spirituality or not. I don't have a problem with the monist. I don't have a problem with saying, there's one world. Yeah, great. We can do science together. We can explore the world together. But historically, when you look at these, this is partly simplification. Of course, these teachings then go in and out of fashion with each other, and because they did trade route religions, they also influence each other immensely. I'm sure we're going to find eventually, as we dig deeper into the history of Zoroastrianism, we're going to discover a lot of influences from other neighboring religions to Zoroastrianism. But Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism were never united, but Zoroastrianism and Buddhism got along well, meaning that's evidence Zoroastrianism is not a dualist religion like the Abrahamic faiths. Rather, if you study the Gathas and then study Zoroastrianism, you discover it's radically monist. Taoism is the same thing. What Taoism does in China is that it really tries to unify Zoroastrianism and Buddhism into one religion, systematically so.
I thought it was Taoism and I thought it was Confucianism and Taoism. That's what I was sort of taught.
No. Confucianism is not a religion. It's a political philosophy.
It's about ritual. It's about.
It's a bit like saying Bismarck is a part of religion. No, he isn't. No?
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's not a religion. It's definitely not a religion. No. Taoism is Chinese religion par excellence, and Chinese culture is immersed in it. I think the problem the Chinese arrive at, though, is that this obsession with uniting yin and yang means that you're going to have a culture obsessed with harmony and balance. Does it sound familiar?
Yeah, you talked about that last time. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. What's the problem with harmony and balance? Is it's too clean? It's not. It doesn't have enough weight. Doesn't have enough weight in it. Doesn't have an edginess to it. It's too perfect. So then it opens itself up with its excess of perfection to falling apart into chaos and you know.
Yeah. So apparently you don't have to be dualist like Plato was to be a little boy who dreams about perfection, immortality, and infinity. Chinese have done that all the time as well, even in the monist world. You could also say that disarray in China, Europe is simply because they're located where they are, because they're river valley cultures where you cannot breed horses. That's too expensive. And then you got the steppes north of China and the steppes east of Europe, and they were always full of steppe people. And when these steppe people bred horses, they started starving, they just put their ass back on the horses and they were right into Europe and China and plunder it. So the history of disarray in Europe and China is actually very similar, and it goes back 5,000 years.
Well, actually, I read somewhere that China should be a bunch of little countries like Europe. It's too big to govern itself in a way that it could have ended up as a bunch of kingdoms, just like Europe is a bunch of countries.
It has been for most of its history, to be honest about it. The uniting empires of China are actually quite rare. So China has been, the different provinces of China do have a lot of independence as well. So it's not that such a bad system. If they would only get over this whole thing with communist dictatorship, they probably would do fine. But anyway, my studies is that I would be happy to convert to Taoism, and I could have. And I chose to convert to Zoroastrianism. And I think it's the Hegelian in me to maybe make that decision. Also because it was neglected, to be honest about it. Philosophers from the West were obsessed with China and India and have been so for, 200 years. And Persia was underrated. There was a brief moment in the 19th century when everybody in France and Germany was into Persia. Yeah, there was a brief period of Persia.
Well, I studied Eastern religion at university. I don't know shit about Zoroastrianism. I probably heard about it in a survey course, but I'm quite. It's a surprise to hear you speak of it in a sense, because
listen, until the Muslim Arab invasion in the end of the 7th century, Zoroastrianism was the world's biggest religion for almost 2,000 years.
Okay,
and we're not finished with. We're not finished with it. I think the big retrieval.
You think it's going to come back en masse or something? Okay, well, wow.
I think it certainly does, because it is the only properly universal religion ever. It was built universal as a universal religion from day one. That's exactly why Persia built 3 empires on it. And those empires were incredibly tolerant and pluralistic. So it's a great model to work from. We can understand what a global empire could be today. So I'm working with Persian historians at the moment. Meaning I'm going to spend some time in Iran the next few years, and also in the rest of Central Asia, and in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And these guys are really into this. And archaeology in Central Asia is a huge new area. Russians are all over the place. And Russia always produced great archaeologists. They're brilliant. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Rediscovering Central Asia. Also understand that Central Asia during antiquity was green and wet. And densely populated and full of narcotic plants and all kinds of fun stuff. So it's a really interesting part of the planet to study at the moment. And of course, because the Silk Route is the most successful unification project in human history, the Silk Route is a good place to start to build contemporary empire theory and understand what we need to do today to connect the world all over again, so we don't run into conflicts and blow off the nuclear bombs. Because the nuclear bombs are still a way more serious threat to us than climate change could ever be.
Okay, so we've gone full circle here. Back to Ecotopia.
Beautifully, Andrew. Beautifully, yeah. What else did you have on your mind for today?
That was my list. Actually, I had one thing I had here. I wrote down logos versus mythos because I was trying to think about.
Oh yeah, okay.
The difference between logos and mythos. Yeah.
Well, we actually have 6 words in Greek, so why don't we involve other guys to have a conversation with us? Okay. Fundamentally, storytelling is 3 different types of storytelling. It's a battlefield. That's father and son relationship. That's logos. There is the ritual, which is sexual in the tribe. Of course, it's pagan. So the ritual is where sexuality and religion meet. That's man versus woman, and that is pathos. And the third one is mythos, which is the campfire at night with the children on.
Oh, pathos. That's okay.
Yeah, and the mythology, like Jordan Peterson says, is a story about we're gonna get moving tomorrow. We respect the matriarch, we respect the patriarch. The whole tribe has to move. So the mythos and the logos and the pathos are obvious here. But then you got these words ethos, and you got kairos, and you got topos in Greek. Okay, so in the world of rhetoric, these terms are important. Now the question is, could these possibly be the in-betweens between the other 3? Because it'd be quite beautiful if you could have a map where you could have all 6. The question is then, what would connect the battlefield with the ritual? That would be like the masculine realm, where like you deliver in the battlefield.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
You get reward of fucking a lot of women during the ritual, right? So you would walk up to the ritual, yeah, we're gonna go and start fucking. So what would that be? Now, what would the connection be between battlefield and campfire? Because that's when the father comes home and he sees the mother and child, you know, the idea that, oh, well, I'm here to deliver to you guys and to protect you. So you're like the center of the tribe, and you are this chaos out there, but you actually provide me with some kind of order, because this is where I get inspiration from to be phallic. So the cosmos chaos relationship is here changed around. It's women and children who represent the cosmos, and it's the men in the world out there that represents the chaos, because they're going to be order in the chaos to deliver to the order inside. Okay, for that to happen, that takes one of these terms too. And the third one would be, what would then be between pathos and mythos? What will be the connection between the mother and child relationship and when the woman then walks off to get fucked? But that's certainly where the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex come into the picture, isn't it? It's just like, oh, mother wants something that I cannot give her, or mother will get something that I don't get. Oedipus Electra complexes. Children are not allowed to walk into that realm. If they walk into that realm, they get really fucked up. They get really fucked up. You don't put children in a sexual environment for a good reason, because they're not supposed to be there. So the pathos happens at night, children are going to bed, etc. Because the campfire is early in the evening with the children are involved, because it's a story for the entire tribe. So mythology must not also be mixed up with pathology, or pathic with mythic should not be mixed up. Now that's interesting, because you can then probably, and I'm not finished with this, you can probably put topos and kairos and ethos into each one of these 3.
This, I think, this could be another conversation, right? You could flesh this out.
Let's involve others. Let's involve others.
You could really flesh this out, right?
Philosophical work. I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm saying we know these 3 arenas exist. We have the data to prove it, and they make sense. And they also make sense from the perspective mother, child, father, son, and the grown-ups' own sphere, the sexual realm, which also religion is that makes sense. That makes sense. We can say that, yeah, pathos and logos and mythos are the 3 ways of telling a story. Narrative is either one of these 3. There you go.
So next time,
but let's have more conversations.
Next time we can talk about we can flesh out mythos, logos, and pathos and all that.
Yeah, and now we're inviting other guys out there. So guys, check out the terms topos, kairos, pathos. You got the topos, kairos, and ethos are the ones we're looking for. Yeah. We got logos, battlefield, hunting ground. We've got pathos, which is sexuality and religion, the ritual. And we've got mythos, which is campfire, which is storytelling. It's just like, where are we going to go tomorrow, right? So that's where the children are taught what it means to be a grown-up. So We got three terms left, which is ethos, which is the right thing to do. And topos, when is the, kairos is when is the right time to do it. And topos is which is the right environment, where to do it, topology. So there you go. So all six should somehow be in there if we look at the Greeks' idea of how to do rhetoric properly. And rhetoric is, of course, the birth of narrative. This was the Greek original ancient understanding of different types of narrative. So they get homework. They get homework, right? All you guys out there, you get homework from me and Andrew. Help us to solve this puzzle. Well, the six different forms of rhetoric placed on the map of the grander tribal narrative map.